Welcome to the RailCats Chat Spring Training Edition. I'm Matt Friedman. I'm here with RailCats manager Greg Tagert, and the wait is just about over. We are almost at RailCats baseball season. Spring training is just about to start. Players are starting to arrive for spring training, and RailCats opening day is just a couple weeks away on May 16th here at home against the Lincoln Salt Dogs. That is a Thursday at 7:10 for RailCats opening day to start the 2013 season. Single game tickets are on sale now. Go to railcatsbaseball.com. You can also call 219-882-2255. And the RailCats promotional schedule has just been released, so go online to railcatsbaseball.com and check that out for the great giveaways, the entertainment, and the deals that we have for every RailCats game this season. Now, as we turn it over to you, Greg, to talk about RailCats spring training, I want you to take us through a day of RailCats spring training. What does one of the players on the roster or one of the spring invitees, what do they go through on a daily basis?
Well, you know, Matt, one of the things we were discussing earlier was spring training. It's not when people hear that phrase, you know, the average fan or even our fans sometimes think, well, we've got a long spring training. It's really, and as you mentioned today, we're talking virtually less than 2 weeks, 12 days officially in camp. And so whether, you know, spring training sometimes can fool the player as well. Many of our players in the past, or many guys who are new to the RailCats or independent baseball, they come in with the mindset that it's spring training. I've got a little bit of time to get in shape. Well, you know, day one, to give you an example, day one we jump right into it. You know, we have a test to test their conditioning each year. You know, we jump into a full practice and simulated game environment where the pitchers are throwing live to hitters, and that's day one of camp. So it can be a little bit of a surprise, and we try to prepare the players as much as possible. But you know, the first 3 days of camp are really just practice, like you would, but they're practice with an emphasis on live action as well. So we break it up into almost a two-part event each day, where we'll practice in the morning, have some live interaction with the players in the afternoon, and then day 4 starts the exhibition schedule. I mean, it's 3 days of practice and routine. Day 4 with the exhibition schedule, and we play 7 games this year. One less than's been the norm for us, and but we'll you know, and after that, you know, 12 days you set your roster and you get ready to go. It all happens in a, you know, as you just talked about, the anxiousness that gets here to this day, and you know, I look forward to it every year. But this last month is always the most difficult on the players, the manager, probably the staff. Everybody's excited. The promotional schedule's out, but what happens is on May 2nd, when we have the open tryout camp, and then May 4th, when spring training starts, it all happens very quickly, and that 12 days is gone in a flash.
Just about 2 weeks for RailCats players to go through spring training, as opposed to major leaguers where they're 5 or 6 weeks of spring training. So a much different process. Now, during major league spring training, people always say the pitchers are ahead of the hitters. Do you see anything similar here, or do you see it the other way around?
You know, I think what we see here is the pitchers who have prepared right are a little bit ahead of the hitters. The one toughest thing that the hitters have to face is in this extended offseason that many of our guys have, unless they were in a spring training with a major league club, you know, which many of the players come from those situations. We have a few of those players, Drew Martinez, Danny Pulfer, who signed with us, and those guys were in camp. They saw some live pitching, but that's the toughest thing. You can get all the tee work in or the soft toss, which the players do. They could do that in batting cages, but to get actual live at-bats, and that's one of the theories that we have here, and that's why we jumpstart things on day one. On day one, our hitters will see live pitching at 100%, and you know, that's one of the things we try to see. So we try to expedite that a little bit, but probably not as drastic here as you see in Major League Baseball, because in Major League Baseball, those pitchers report many times 2 weeks prior to the position players. They throw bullpens, they get their arms ready a little bit more. And I think if both cases could do it better, major leaguers would want to shorten their spring training, and we would want to extend ours by several days. I think ours is maybe just a little too short.
And you mentioned it's kind of a challenge for the players to jump right into it.
Right.
What about on the staff side, with you as a manager needing to make those roster decisions? How tough is it for you to judge these players on this very small sample size?
It is, without a doubt, regardless of how long I've done this before, and maybe a little different in the early years of independent baseball, because you played a lot of inter-squad games where your team, you would bring in 40 to 50 players in spring training, and especially in that first 7 to 8 years, because the whole idea of independent baseball was to give opportunities. So you had a lot of guys in spring training. You would inter-squad virtually every day. You had a little, the players were a little bit more even, so you had some tough decisions. But here, the window to evaluate a player is very quickly, and actually we say 12 days. I think the final roster this year has to be set on the evening of the 10th day of spring training. So you've got 10 days, virtually those 7 exhibition games and those 3 days of workouts, and it is without a doubt the toughest. And I'll tell you right now, Matt, we'll make a mistake on some guys. It happens every year. Not that we make a mistake on guys, because if we've done our job well, every player here in camp can compete for a job. There's no doubt about that. We have good players that can compete against each other. However, it's never been the case, and if we'd be the first team that ever do it, if you start the season with the same 22 you end the season with, it just doesn't happen. Part of that is those evaluations in spring training, trying to make a decision based on 6 at-bats, 7 at-bats, a couple days. It's very difficult.
Greg, you mentioned just a few questions ago talking about the conditioning that the players go through in a conditioning test on the first day of spring training. That mile run they have to do, I know that you don't make a big deal about it, but it's kind of become called the Tagert Mile, when all the players have to run a mile around the warning track here at U.S. Steel Yard. When did you start doing that, and what do you get out of seeing them run that mile?
All that does for us, and probably I don't make a big deal because I don't run the mile, so I don't want to sound like a hypocrite. but we keep calling it the Tagert Mile. The players may start expecting me to run it. What we've done, first of all, to answer your first question, it's something I've done since the very first year I managed in 1995, with our first club. And we've done it in something that every team, whether it's Major League Baseball, your college baseball programs, do some kind of conditioning test. What we've found over the years, all that tells us, has this player been doing what he needs to do in the off season? Aside from the throwing, the hitting, are those legs going to be ready? Is this guy prepared? We don't base the mile run on whether this guy's going to make our club or not. We've had many 8 or 9 minute milers make our club and make an impact, and we've had several players, from the other side of the coin that have ran the 5 minute mile that haven't made the club. But it is a gauge of, did a player do what's necessary to come in ready to camp, and that's really all it is.
And now you also talked about some late additions to the roster. The roster's right now full at 28 players going into spring training. The most interesting addition is pitcher Takahiro Matsuka coming over from Japan. This would be his first time playing in America. What made you decide to sign him, as he had a tryout here at U.S. Steel Yard, and what role do you hope he can play on this team?
Well, Matt, as you know, you were directly involved in that process with Takahiro, getting him here. Here's a player who had a couple seasons in the big leagues in Japan, and unfortunately for the Japanese players who get to the point, as many of our players currently are, whether they're the Mike Massaros or the Christian Guerreros, guys who've had long minor league careers, even guys who have tasted a little bit of that major league time, there's not a lot of places in Japan for the player to go back to. One minor league team per major league team. So it's very limited, the opportunity. So that's why we see several Japanese players each year pursuing baseball, in the United States. Many of the ways that these players are pursuing it, they're using independent baseball as that avenue. We've been fortunate with our contact that helps us out with Japanese players to have several good players here. And this person came from that gentleman in Los Angeles, was willing to, I guess what impressed me more than anything, as you know, was willing to fly out from New York on his own, show up at the ballpark, and if you remember, that day was a little cool and crisp. And here's a player who came out to want to, his passion to continue playing and to prove he can play at the major league level was something that was hard to ignore. Now, based on that tryout, we're not absolutely sure he's going to make the club. It wasn't one of these things, hey, this is a no-doubter. But there was a lot of things there, and I think you saw that day, his commitment to play was something very special, and we thought it was worth at least taking a chance on him.
And do you see him as somebody who would come out of the bullpen? He mostly did in his career in Japan.
One of the things we think is that we've asked him to come here prepared to start, and we can always make the adjustment from there instead of the other way around. And that's the way we do it with a lot of players, or a lot of pitchers. But we think in his case, coming off a couple of injuries, the bullpen can be a little difficult for the player to make the adjustment to. Throwing every day, the wear and tear. We think we can monitor it better if he comes in prepared to start, stretches his innings out. So that's what we're going to ask him to do. I think we saw in his statistics he had started a little bit in his minor league career, so he's got a little bit of a background. He's got the pitches like a lot of the Japanese players do, and you saw that day he throws 5 different pitches. He has that capability. Although we had success in the past with Koichi Masawa, really the best reliever the RailCats have ever had, work out of the bullpen with that same type of repertoire. But we're looking at right now at Takahiro competing for one of those jobs in the rotation.
Previewing RailCats spring training with RailCats manager Greg Tagert, and always in spring training, there are those big position battles.
Yeah.
Where do you expect we see those on the diamond this spring training?
Well, maybe more so this year than ever. As I think we've gone into the last few years in spring training, we have been very experience laden on the position player side. And we've talked about it before, Matt, but we made a conscious effort midway through last year to get a little younger in some position areas. So as we went into camp, some of the rules that are in place in the American Association, the number of rookies each team had, we've been utilizing those rookie spots really from the pitching staff standpoint. Now the only effort was, let's find as many good young position players as we can. But with that, there's a variable. They have to compete for jobs. There's no guarantees. We have some competition in the outfield. Although we have Mike Massaro and Adam Klein, the return of Christian Guerrero. Christian faced some injuries last year, is returning to us. He'll do a lot of DHing this year. That's one of the things that we're going to ask Christian to do. That leaves that center field job interesting. We have a veteran, Chris Colton, who is known to be a premier defensive outfielder, but he's been away from the game for a couple seasons. We have a young outfielder we signed, Drew Martinez, to compete for that job. So there'll be some nice competition there. Really the competition in that middle infield with shortstop and second base, 2 of the young players we signed last year, Zach Mitchell, Chase Tucker, who we like. A couple of the young players we brought in, Al J. Davis, Danny Pulfer, the first base job, wide open. From a staff standpoint, it's exciting, but also from a manager standpoint, a little unsure because, we loved what we saw with many of these players last year, and we think they're capable of playing. But it's a lot different in August than it is the next year, and you tend to see, some of those things. And really, spring training will tell us a little bit of the story, but I think we'll know a little bit more on opening night in Lincoln on May 16th.
And it will be very exciting to see how that all plays out. Again, May 16th, RailCats opening day here at US Steel Yard, a 7:10 start, and that's going to be a Thirsty Thursday as well with $2 Miller Lite and Miller Genuine Draft. So we look forward to that, and you can stay tuned to our YouTube RailCats TV channel as we'll have more interviews and features throughout the 2013 season. Well, that's some nice merchandise in there. I think we should buy up some of these
Yeah, we did.
mini bats, baseball.